Hello, hello, it is Justin Coletti, and today I have got the DAW open because we're going to be looking at a whole bunch of plugins and going over a whole bunch of ideas about mixing with analog saturators inside your DAW, and one of my favorite topics, mixing with effects pedals, which is sometimes a little annoying to do in the analog domain, but in the digital domain, there are so many cool sounding guitar and effects pedals that we should probably be using in our mixes on things like drums, on things like vocals, on things like basically everything that isn't guitars, although they can also be fun on guitars. And the guy who's going to be joining me today to talk about some of his favorite ways of using these types of effects is Taylor Larson. Taylor, in case you haven't heard of him, he is the founder of a plugin company called MixWave. They make awesome stuff. We'll talk more about their plugins later, but he's also a Grammy-nominated, gold-certified mixing engineer in his own right. Super excited to have him on the channel today. Taylor, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Not too bad. It's good to have you here. Taylor's worked on a lot of heavy music, hard rock, and metal, and he has also made plugins that work well for those genres and just about every other genre as well. And there's some fun stuff here, and we'll hear some kind of pop examples, some kind of general examples, some heavy music examples, all sorts of stuff. So Taylor, real quick, for people who are not yet familiar with your plugins, you have this whole brand called MixWave. You just came out with a new plugin today called the Hazel VNE. You're debuting it here on the channel. Super excited to share it with people, and I'll play that for them. But you got a whole bunch of amps, stomp boxes, and really interesting pro audio devices. How long have you been making plugins now, and how many of them do you think you have?
Well, we have about 30 at this point. If you break, parts of the suites down into individual pedals and stuff, so people can buy things separately. But yeah, we started with drum libraries and virtual instruments of that sort, moved into the guitar amp world, and then for me personally, when we first started, the main thing was to do the mixing pro audio stuff because that's what I do and that's what I'm extremely passionate about. And so we've recently just moved into that world.
Yeah, I've got to say, one of the things I love about your stuff is you make really exceptionally vibey plugins, many of these. I'm going to take you guys through, Taylor sent me some audio examples of his own, and I also created some audio examples on my side. Some of these things were running snare drums through effects pedals. I mean, just some of the cool and crazy tones you can get that aren't always, they don't have to sound like you're running through a distortion pedal and it's an amp simulator. Like, there's subtle things that you can do that can almost make a drum sound feel like it's a new sample without using a sample. And we'll look at that kind of stuff as well and how you'd use these on vocals. And we have a whole bunch of audio examples to show. But I got to say, just off the bat, I've been really impressed by just the general quality of these emulations, and also the fact that you're emulating stuff that other people don't emulate and doing a really good job of it. The Hazel stuff is based, I believe, on like the Fairn kind of stuff. So the tube transformer based stuff that is really clean, but if you push it really hard, it's really interesting. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I think a lot of folks haven't heard. You guys have a Pultec emulation. It's a unique Pultec emulation, unlike others, and we'll talk about that in just a minute here. I've really been loving this 1981 pedal. Not only is it super cool looking, but it sounds great. You're one of the only companies I know, I think there's like maybe like one other, who has a stay level emulation. And I gotta say, the Gate stay level is one of the vibiest compressors of all time. And again, yours is unique and a bit different from those who are doing anything like it. You got more of the Fairn stuff, the Electrodyne. I've been messing around with the EQ, and it is crazy how far you can push this thing while still having it sound good and interesting, and just how much you can reshape things. And I know one of your favorites here, the CA70S, really cool saturator based on some tube devices from like the 1920s, but it sounds ridiculous in modern genres of stuff, just the weight that it can add. I don't want to talk too much about these tools. I want to get right into people hearing them. But before we get into some of these audio examples, if you guys are here for the live stream premiere, let me know in the chat box and in the comments if you can see us and hear us, if you need us to adjust any of the levels. And if you guys have any particular plugins or applications that you want to hear, put in requests. I will be reading the live chat throughout. I'll ask Taylor questions that might be coming in. And you can also play along yourself at home. Try this stuff out for free. Go to mixwave.com, download anything they make, and try it out for free, I think for something like 2 weeks or maybe soon longer than that. So check them out, mixwave.com. Before I get into showing some of the audio examples that I think are super cool, Taylor, what's your overall philosophy in how to use A, saturators in the mix, and B, pedals in the mix? Because that's what we're going to be focusing on today with the audio examples.
Yeah, I want to just take a step back really quick just to talk about our
Please.
company and the reason for creating it.
Sure.
So I've been a producer and mixer, I don't know, for the better part of 14, 15 years at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And, I use the same stuff that everybody uses. And we felt like there was an option, and with the team that we had, to create analog plugins or digital plugins that felt and sounded more analog. And the
Mm.
way we do it, it's not the fastest, cheapest, easiest way. It's, everything is schematic based, component level modeling. And that's why these things add so much color and have such a crazy feel to them, because we're pretty much taking technology that you would use for like a guitar amp to make it feel realistic and not sound fizzy like an old school pod or something. And
Mm-hmm.
we're applying that to like tube analog devices and things of that nature, and that's why we're able to get that feel and color. With that being said, I've come up using certain plugins for things, and like an example is there was a plugin I used to love that I would use at the end of every vocal to just make it kind of step forward, like you and I were speaking earlier about that coil, how it adds that weight and that like chestiness to it. And that's for me, that's what the coil is you put it at the end on a vocal, and it just makes it step out in front of the entire mix. And then as
Mm-hmm.
far as pedals, we just had this idea of like, man, there's so many cool pedals and cool brands that are making pedals, and it's like it's not really feasible to use them in a reamp setting. I mean, you can do it, but you need to buy two of them if you want to do it in stereo, and then it's
Mm-hmm.
unbalanced and yada yada yada. So we were like, what if we go to these brands and make these pedals, and then we can start using them on auxes, we can start using them for mixing. Like, what if you could put a clon on vocals or snare drum, or a germanium boost or something. And so we started trying it, and it's just a really cool way to get creative and get different colors and textures and sounds. For me, it's like thinking about how everything sounds the same now in AI and everything's so polished and clean. I think it's a really cool way to get creative and kind of rough things up and make them feel completely different and create a completely different sonic signature, if that makes sense.
Totally, yeah. And I've got to say real quick that there's been this idea lately of, oh, don't just have an 1176, have a slightly different emulation of the same 1176. And I think there's some validity to that, but going just slightly further afield into other brands of tools that are less well known, but that are still known to make things sound more finished. There's these
Yeah.
devices that have stood the test of time, and Farn Hazel Rig is one of those brands where not everyone has a Farn preamp or EQ or a compressor or Hazel Rig one in their studio, but the people that do are the kinds of people who make awesome records and who said, you know what, this is making its way onto so many finished records. Same thing with the gate stay level. Like, you don't hear the sound of the gate stay level on crappy records that often because the only people using
No.
them are people who make really cool records, and they've just proven themselves again and again. So they have that kind of proven character vibe of something like an 1176, an LA2A, 140 plate, but they're just a little bit further afield where there's not the same exact kind of copycatting thing going on. And once you start
Yeah.
to get to know each of these devices, they all have their own sonic signatures. And we'll look at some subtle differences in distortion that you guys can hear in some of these saturators. And like some of them, they just make the mid-range kind of bloom out. Some of them are making the kind of sub area bloom. And it's almost like once you get to know them, it's about going through the crayon box and just having a sense memory for like, yes, that's the crayon I'm going to use on this sound. And they just kind of lead you in the right direction without you having to fiddle around with messing with like a really fine tunable compressor or saturator plugin.
Yeah.
Like, they just sound the way that they do. And it's just a more fun, easy way to work and maintain creativity instead of being too overly analytical, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a super creative way to work. It's like, how many ways can you get from point A to point B, and can you do it where it's just a feel vibe thing rather than being analytical and going down that rabbit hole? For me, I really like things that do something really quickly. You push
Yeah.
into it and you go, whoa, okay, that's really awesome. Okay, let me move on to the next thing. that way I can kind of get through the mix and get it to like move as a unit, you know?
Totally. Well, let's get to hearing some examples right now, because I think some of these are going to be shocking before and after incredible examples, and some are going to be really subtle ones where I want you guys to get good headphones on or good monitors and listen really closely. We're getting some comments coming in ready. Dave Dunsire writes in to say, I got a chance to use the Hazel Reg VNE in person, and it's truly amazing. It's so sick to see it in the plugin world since it's pretty pricey hardware to afford. I think it's like a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 device or something like that, some of this Hazel rig. And you now have it in plug-in form, I think for, it's on intro special right now for $99, down from $150. So definitely check it out. If you're interested in the Hazel rig stuff, it's about 33% off. So go ahead and check it out. Download it for free right now over at mixwave.com. And if you decide you like it during this intro special, it's a great time to get it. Yes, it does emulate a very expensive piece of hardware that has a really interesting color that you'll get to hear, and you'll get to nerd out with us and put on your wine connoisseur / saturation connoisseur glasses for a minute here and hear it with us. But before we get into that, the first audio example we have pulled up for something that has a lot of character is this stay level. Music Manias are already asking, how is your stay level different from the latest stay release from Kazrog? I want you to talk about what makes this unique, but before we do, let's just get into hearing some audio examples. So I'm going to go through and take this drum loop we've put the stay level on, and we'll hear some before and after. And while this is playing through, if you're here for the live premiere, type into the chat box, what's the difference that you're hearing in these drums before and after? What stands out to you? Because there's saturation happening here, and there's compression happening here. And the compression is pretty significant and pretty cool. All right, here's our before, and this will be our after. Now, that's so interesting how much that morphs. It almost feels like we've added some sample augmentation to it and some reverb to it, and we haven't. We're just putting a cool sounding compressor across the drums. I'll give you my quick tasting notes, Taylor. For me, I love what's happening in the attack and release here, and it just slaps. Like there's this thing where the initial transients are kind of getting through. It sounds super punchy, and then the release is so fast that's bringing up the sustain of the reverb on the snare so much. We're hearing so much additional snare reverb. So let's hear that before and after one more time. You guys listen to that difference in the attack, and particularly in the bloom of that reverb coming up. Here's a before again. I love how it's also lifting the groove of the hi-hat. Like it's changed the emphasis of the groove slightly. I think it's sounding really cool. What do you like about the stay level, and what makes this unique compared to the very few other stay level emulations that are out there?
Okay, so the one that he's speaking about, they did in partnership with Retro. And so for us, what we did is we found like a time capsule stay level from, I don't know, it's a super early one. It's actually sitting behind me, and it had all the original tubes. It like wasn't used very much, so it was like in insane condition. If you could bring back up the picture of it, so there's a couple features on here. Okay, so when we first did the model, modern is where we ended up, and we really liked it because it was more airy, and it kind of sounded, it was cool on like, I don't know, pop vocals, rap vocals. It was cleaner than what we were getting when we were listening to the old one. And then we tried tweaking some things, and that's where we ended up at vintage, which was kind of like more distorted, a little vibier, but it was still, the original one that we had was still like crazy dark and syrupy and had like this insane low end. Maybe it's the age, it's the wear, it's, I don't know, it's the time, you know, maybe the parts just wore out and, you know, you lose some of the top end. So we were like, can we put that on a knob? So if you look over, there's an age knob. So if you play it and turn that up and down, all the way up will sound like the unit we've modeled. But the big thing with this is that it's essentially like 3 different units, whereas the Kazrog is probably more of the modern. It's probably cleaner, smoother. And it also doesn't have the crazy release time that we added, because we felt the stock release times, even with like the mod from Retro, which our unit had as well, we felt like you just couldn't get fast enough. So we were like, what would happen if we switched some resistors and got it to go even faster? But yeah, if you want to show them the age knob, that's pretty crazy. So I'll go ahead and mute myself.
And yeah, I'll just piggyback on that real quick to say that the cool thing about the stay level is on the right source. Like you put it on a vocal or a certain kind of acoustic guitar that's playing the right rhythm, and it automatically sounds cool. But you could use them in such a limited number of cases because of the limitation on timing. And you do have some of the fastest settings I've seen yet on a stay level. So what this stay level is doing right now, when I first heard it, I'm like, wait a second, that sounds like the tone of a stay level, but it's doing something to the attack and release I've never heard a stay level do before. Like this kind of punchiness that you got out of it. You would generally not think about using an old school stay level on this kind of source. You can't get that out of
an original. Yeah, exactly.
So I can mess around with this mode, and I'm right now in the fastest mode here, but we have a fast mode, a medium mode, and a slow mode. And these medium and slows are probably a little closer to the original sound of a stay level. And we can show how that just wouldn't work on these drums, but it might work really nicely on the right kind of vocal. So yeah, let me play around with this. I'm going to put it into modern mode with like the age off, and then we'll go into vintage and we'll increase the amount of age on it. So here's our bypass. Ooh, just rounding off. I see what you mean about being like syrupy and dark. Like it's just like the lower mids and some of the upper bass is just like widening out bit by bit. Really cool.
That's what the real unit we had from like the 50s sounded like. And we were like, this is really cool, but it might be a little extreme. So we'd like to give people the option to kind of go backwards from there, you know?
Oh yeah. And we can go even more extreme too, because right now we've got like the wet on 50%. So if you want to hear this thing go all the way into that land, then and that is maybe a sound you just have to use in parallel, which is obviously why the mix knob is here. And this is so colorful. I mean, our before here. Now we've obviously taken it entirely too far, but you know, dialing this age back, dialing the wet dry back to about here, and all of a sudden we've transformed it, but still put in this usable territory. And the sound to me does feel more finished. I mean, this sounds more like a kit on an actual record and less like a collection of drum samples.
Yes, exactly.
Sweet. All right, let's get on to some of the others that I'd really love to hear. Now, the VNE is your newest one, so that is one that I want to spend a little bit of time with. This is a very rare kind of compressor because we're getting a little bit away from saturation here, because although this is modeled after a tube unit with a transformer, it is a relatively clean sounding tube unit. And then, although this is a compressor and we can do a lot of compression with it, this type of compressor can do really transparent compression. It is one of the few PWM modeled compressors out there. I think there's only a couple other companies out there making a PWM compressor. For those of you who don't know, that's pulse width modulation. Probably the most famous example of that is the Pi compressor, but the VNE I think is maybe even smoother than that. Can you give us a sense of what the vibe is with Hazel rig / Farn? Why did you model the VNE, and what should we expect out of this one?
The best way I could describe it is like if you want to compress something and control it without changing the nature of what it is. But it's weird because I want to say it's clean and not colorful, but it's very charming. Like it almost does have a color. It's just more of a transparent thing. But it's a very nuanced thing. It's very euphoric sounding, and it's really just like the complete opposite of what you just showed people. And that's the thing is we want to be diverse and kind of have all the different colors of, the palette. So it's just a different flavor, and I really like it for vocals. I really like it on a whole mix. Like it almost kind of reminds me of like if you could take the character of like the old Focusrite compressor from the 90s and like the charmingness of a Sontec EQ and put that vibe like into a compressor. It kind of does those things for me. And that's another thing too, is like when I was younger, I used to get mad if an emulation of something didn't sound exactly the same as the hardware I had. But what I didn't realize is that there's pot tolerances, there's all these different variations that can make something not sound the same. So rather compare, it's more like, how does this tool fit in for me? So I'm saying it kind of reminds me of these other things. Well, that's cool. That means I can reach for this instead of reaching for those things,
Yeah. As long as it is a usable sound that makes things sound more better in some way, like there's so much difference from unit to unit often when it comes to tolerances that, man, it must be such a trick sometimes modeling analog hardware, because it's like you get like 3 units of the same one and then pick which one of these do we want to model sometimes, and that will send your plug in a particular direction. But if you find something that has an interesting character and you can memorize what the character of that plugin is like, then you can just pull it up in the right spots. Let's hear what the Hazel rig sounds like on these vocals. We have a vocal example here that we're doing substantial compression on, but I don't think you're really going to hear it as compression or over compression, even though we're doing a ton. Here's our before.
Head under water, holding my breath at the bottom. Now I'm caught in the solder, got myself in an endless fight. Head under water, holding my breath at the bottom. Now I'm caught in the solder, got myself in an endless fight.
And I think it's done a great job of containing the dynamic range, bringing up the quiet aspects, making him sound a little bit more solid, a little bit more finished without hearing the artifacts of compression. I'll do a little quicker before and after. Here's our before again.
Head under water, holding my breath at the bottom. Now I'm caught in the solder, got myself in an endless fight. Head under water, holding my breath at the bottom. Now I'm caught in the solder.
Cool. And yeah, it's just doing a substantial amount of compression while still sounding clean. And I think you'll hear some of the additional charm that's in this thing when we put it on a whole source. And that's where we're going to hear some of the saturation of this device, where I'm going to put it on an entire mix, and we're going to hear what it does to the frequency spectrum and what it does in saturating different areas, kind of differing amounts. And we'll hear it just in that capacity. But I also want to give you some stuff that goes even further, because that one was a really subtle one compared to our first one. We totally reshaped the sound. This is going to be a little more extreme. This is one of the cooler looking pedals. I was born in 1982 and it looks so cool that I want to have been born in 1981 now. But this 1981 pedal is a fuzz pedal. Don't tell anyone what it's based on yet, because I was pleasantly surprised when I found out what it was based on. I'm going to keep this compressor on. We'll have it in bypass for now, and then I'll take it out of bypass. You guys give me your guesses and let me know what it's doing to the vocal for you. So here's a before.
Head under water, holding my breath at the bottom. Now I'm caught in the solder, got myself in an endless fight. Head under water, holding my breath at the bottom. Now I'm caught in the solder, got myself in an endless fight.
And because there's a little bit of tuning going on in this vocal, and it's kind of compressing it even further, because saturators kind of are compressors in a way, or at least the dynamic control, range control devices, it's making the vocal sound more synthy to me in a good way. I mean, if I take both these off, here's our raw vocal sound.
Head under water, holding my breath at the bottom. Now I'm caught in the solder, got myself in an endless fight.
And this is just such a better way, I feel like, of lo-fiing a vocal, taking a pedal like this, substantial compression, going into a pedal like this, so the saturation that's happening is a really even saturation by having compression before the saturator. And I don't know, it's making it sound like a lo-fi thing without the kind of corny, overused, I'm going to use an EQ filter to just take away lows and highs, and then use some generic buzzy sounding plug-in saturator. And if you don't like the sound of this saturator on the vocal, you just grab another crayon from the crayon box, because there's like a half dozen more saturators like this in the arsenal from MixWave, or if you use pedals in general. So what's this modeled after, and what do you like about this device, and what's it for?
Yeah, the 1981, I believe, is based on the Rat pedal, which I know a lot of people love. For me, in real life, the 1981 pedal is my favorite pedal, like, ever. And the plugin sounds exactly the same. And I actually, like, for my main vocals, I use that setting, and I just do the dry wet, because I notice when you have a full mix and you have guitars, cymbals, everything else, when you get a little bit of that saturation running in parallel, it just makes the vocal a little more exciting. It smooths it out, a little more synth like you said. So like, I don't even use it for lo-fi. I just use it on a final mix, and I'd probably put another compressor after that, and that would just be it, you know? So yeah, that's, for me, that's what I use on vocals.
Sweet. All right. And then we have one more here where we're going back into slightly more, I want to say slightly more subtle, but this is not going to be as significant as doing a ton of compression like we were in the first one, or doing a ton of, guitar pedal distortion with the mix knob turned down like we did in the last one. This is really I think like a line amplifier from the 1920s. What are we looking for with this one? What's it based on? The CA70S? What's it modeling, and what should we be listening for with this type of saturation device?
It's based on an old either Gates or RCA. I think both. I think it's like a generic schematic that both of them used. And this company Coil makes these preamps now, and they're like earth-shatteringly massive sounding. It's crazy. And so, the Kalen and I, the other guy from MixWave that does mixing as well, we were like, we have to model this. Like, this would be so amazing to have in the box. And so what this does for me, I love it last in the chain on whatever source that I'm going to use it on. But it just takes whatever you have and it just moves it right up. So it's like, if you have a dense mix and you can't get your vocal to step forward, it pulls it right up. But not only that, it makes it feel like you recorded to tape or something. Like it like de-harshes and gets rid of anything digital sounding. This is personally one of my favorites, and yeah, it's crazy. I used to use a different plugin for like years, and this has replaced that for me.
Sweet. Yeah, this one, to give my quick tasting notes, I felt like it was bringing the mids forward, like the low mids and the center mids, but without making things muddier, making things, if it makes any sense, more present or more forward in the mix without, and giving us this kind of fullness without muddiness. It almost feels like it's taking down maybe some extreme high and extreme low, and then bringing up the level a little bit, where I just get this additional kind of girth. Enough me talking about. Those are my tasting notes. Maybe you can listen for that kind of stuff as we do the before and after. So here it is with the other plugins turned off. First in bypass. Let me make sure I have that highlighted. There we go.
Head underwater, holding my breath at the bottom. Now I'm caught in the slaughter. Got myself in an endless fight. Head underwater, holding my breath at the bottom. Now I'm caught in the slaughter. Got myself in an endless fight.
And I'll do that one more time on this kind of shorter passage so people can really tune into it. Here's our before again.
Head underwater, head underwater, head underwater, head underwater.
So I think this is one of these things where when we're listening to it either by itself or in the context of a full mix, it's somewhat subtle, but it changes the whole feeling of the thing. And if you're having trouble tuning into exactly what it's doing, I think you'll hear it even better when we get to the full mix that I placed this on, and you can hear exactly where in the frequency spectrum things are being done. But yeah, to me, it just brought things a little bit further. And I think if you further forward, and I think if you heard it in context, an entire mix, it's like this alternate way of turning up the level, where instead of turning up the level overall, it feels like you're turning up the level in the right places for a vocal to kind of step up, if that makes any sense. How do you feel about that, Taylor?
Yeah, I would say it's that for sure. It's there's probably a bit of harmonic things happening that kind of make you perceive it as louder, but it just makes the singer sound bigger. Like it's to me, it sounds like they sang in a bigger microphone or something, you know, almost like a ribbon mic or something. But I just love it.
Sweet. And another thing that's worth checking out is we also try the idea of, instead of using like a conventional delay, what if we were to put a delay across, say, a delay across a delay bus using pedals? And first of all, a pedal like this, I think, has its own specific distinctive tone right out of the box. So you're not pulling up like your standard delay plugin and then tweaking endless variables to get a vibe out of it. It has a vibe to begin with. And then even if you were to bring up your stock delay plugin and pick, vibe number 3 from the presets of vibes, it's not necessarily super unique sounding if that's like the same bank of presets that everyone's drawing from. So again, I think this is one of those shortcuts where if you have a few different delay effect pedals in your arsenal, I think one of the most common beginner and intermediate mistakes I hear with reverb and delay is the reverbs and delays just sound way too stock, way too hi-fi, way too open. There's too much high end on them. They're not like low passing them enough. They're not grungifying them enough. And when they compare their records to their favorite records, invariably the reverbs and delays on their favorite records sound so much more messed up than the reverbs and delays that they're using. And the way to get away with a ton of reverb and delay in your mix, I think, is to have a more messed up sounding reverbs and delays that take up less space, have more of a signature sound, and then you start folding just a little bit in and it's super audible, instead of being like, oh, I can't hear any of my reverb, and you turn it up and turn it up and turn it up, and finally it's loud enough that you hear all this splashy high end on it. And that's not what you need. I don't know. Am I crazy here?
No, I think that's spot on. And I think it's like you have problems with sibilance. There's all kinds of issues when you have the stuff too hi-fi. I mean, yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Sweet. All right, so I'm going to play a little bit of this, and since we have 2 of them on, we're kind of doing this as a dual mono situation. I could grab one of these and adjust maybe the mod speed or something like that to kind of give a little bit more difference between left and right. I think right now we have subtly different delay times between left and right, but I can go even further with that. So here it is, first with it off. And then when I unmute this, it'll be on.
Head underwater, holding my breath at the bottom. Now I'm caught in the slaughter, got myself in an endless fight. Head underwater, holding my breath at the bottom. Now I'm caught in the slaughter, got myself in an endless fight.
And that is generally the kind of thing that you want to do with delays, like separate them from the main vocal a little bit, which again, when people are beginning, they're often not doing enough of that. They're auditioning their reverbs and delays kind of in solo with the vocal, wanting to make sure it sounds big and hi-fi and then putting it back into the mix. But these kinds of things where it really feels like a separate shadow from the source sound is, I don't know, what makes these types of effects really work in the mix.
It's super pocketed, and it's like, it feels right,
Yep. All right, the next one here is snare, and you've given us, we have 2 things. We have one really subtle example where we're using this Benson germanium boost. This is a guitar pedal that is basically, I mean, it's a little bit like a tube screamer, but not, right? This is something that's adding drive without being like a fuzz box or, a metally sounding distortion. And it really adds some nice harmonics and bite to the snare. So we'll do this subtle example first. And then I've created a wacky example, taking the snare much further as well. So tell us a little bit about the Benson germanium boost. Why is it interesting for guitar, and what makes it a pick for you on snare?
So I figured it out on snare by accident, and it's just a clean boost using a germanium circuit, which the germanium kind of has its own sound, its own thing. I mean, if you go back to like the old Neves, they were originally germanium, and I was trying it in the suite of guitar plugins, and I thought, let me just try this one thing on drums, and I put it on the kick, the snare, and I was just blown away by it. The way I used it on the snare was a little different than this. So I like to clip the channel. I know it's breaking the rules and stuff. Mm-hmm. So like I kind of doctored this one to bring it back so people wouldn't get mad about the volume differences. But like the way I would do it is I would completely smash the channel. So if you want to play it like this and then bring the output up to hear like how aggressive it is when it drives into the channel, feel free to. That's how I do it. But yeah, I found it was a really cool plugin to clip in overdrive.
Right. So a more fun way to boost. And sometimes, honestly, that's all we need is a more fun way to boost, even if it just has a little bit of character. I remember we had Michael Brower on the channel once doing one of our Mixcon master classes, and he was messing around with some saturators, and someone wrote in the chat and was asking the question afterwards, like, when you're turning on that saturator, you're turning up the level. Like, if you're not level matching it, how do you know if it sounds better or not? And it's like, dude, that is not the question you ask when you are mixing. You can maybe ask that question when you're evaluating and trying to figure out, and you're doing your experimentation to figure out what each tool sounds like. And once you've taught yourself that, yes, I can hear this thing when it's subtle, and here's the kind of character it lends. But once you've memorized that, half of the point of some of these saturators is to boost level in an inspiring way that gets you to do the right things that you should be doing. And the character that it's adding is a benefit, but honestly, it's not the only benefit. Sometimes like just the confidence boost of taking a thing that sounds cool and add some richness and turning up the dial on it and forgetting about the fader and just looking at the one knob that you have like developed a friendship with. And really, like, sometimes, honestly, having a pretty looking GUI sometimes makes you listen better or listen for the right things. Now, that's not to say that Germanium Boost doesn't have a sound. Obviously, it does have a sound. I mean, this thing is painstakingly modeled, and if we were to do a null test, you would see that there's a difference between the before and after. But I don't think that constantly level matching things is always the way to work when you're in the process of mixing. But right now, we have it fairly subtle. Here's before and after. Here's our before on the snare. I'm going to bring the whole level of the snare up a little bit. So there's a very subtle level increase here, but what I'm hearing is the snare sounds less flat all of a sudden. Like there's this additional harmonic edge being added. So without adding like brightness or an EQ boost to say 1.5K, 2K, 3K, we're getting some of that like audibility and some of this additional edge without getting like this, I don't know, this effecty EQ vibe where we're just like peaking out one area. Now, with that said, I think sometimes it's fun to do more extreme things with these. So I've picked, what do you call this one?
That is the Morning Glory by JHS.
This is so much fun, and I'm doing a much less subtle example here. I kind of level matched it by turning down the output, but this is going to be much more extreme. Where do I have the wet dry set here? Let me see. Or is there a wet dry on this one? Yeah, there is. I think I have it all the way wet. So this is much more extreme, but this is almost to me more like selecting a new sample. So here's our before. So for me, this is kind of doing the type of thing on the snare that like a super fast attack, super fast release compressor does, where it brings up the sustain, but it's doing it without this annoying way that a lot of stock compressors do, where you do like a super fast attack and it just makes the whole thing dull. This one is like keeping the front edge on, and because it's adding this edge and this harmonics, it retains the brightness and clarity of the attack as we're bringing up the sustain. So let me play that a little bit more for you. Here's again our before. And honestly, the level of the attack has not come up, but the level of the sustain has come up so much that you could say, even though I'm bringing it down by like 4 dB here, it's still louder, but it's like, only part of the sound is louder. If we were to level match to peak level, I mean, these are probably equally loud. It's almost like we brought up the sustain to match the attack better. So much so that the sustain has come up so much that now I'm hearing the bleed. I feel like I've got to turn on a gate. Here, I'll turn on a little of this Fab Filter gate to now get rid of this hi-hat that I brought up. Here's our before. total reshaping. I mean, that's kind of almost like I've selected a new snare sample. Another fun thing I want to play around with is this idea of using effect pedal reverbs and delays. And this one, not a spring. I don't know this one. I'm not familiar with this from the guitar world. I think I was in the guitar world long before this one came out, maybe. I'm not sure. Can you tell me the pedal this was modeled after and how long it's been around?
That one doesn't exist. So
it doesn't, okay.
We were creating the JHS suite, and Josh was like, can you design a spring reverb? We're going to call it Not a Spring because they make Not a Clon, which is a clon clone, but it's not a clon.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he just had a specific sound and specific parameters he wanted, so we designed that for them. So now everybody keeps bugging them to make that in pedal form.
Sweet. So this is a very springy sounding. This is a totally different kind of reverb than you would normally find on a snare. It's almost like wrong to use this kind of reverb, but it was so much fun. I just love this idea of using effect pedals and things that they weren't designed for. So I have a very dark kind of a reverb going on here. Here's our before. And to me, that is totally different than the sound of something like
it's a completely different instrument.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, we have morphed this snare so much with two plugins. And when was the last time you put on like an EQ and a compressor and a limiter and a transient designer and a reverb and then did a whole bunch of stuff with them, and you didn't shape them nearly as much as I did just by putting on two pedals? And I kid you not, I barely changed the knobs on any of these. Like, it was almost just sound selection and then a little bit of, okay, I want to cut out some extreme lows and some extreme highs. And I'm going to play around with this kind of almost like a tilt EQ that you have. I think I went in the slightly darker direction on it. And then something similar I did with this gold thingy. What was it called again?
Morning Glory.
Morning Glory. The Morning Glory, where I just played around with the levels of the volume and the drive and then turned down the output a little bit, played around with the tone knob, said, no, it's good in the starting position. And just with like 22 seconds of audio processing, I'm like, I like this. I would use this as a like sample support kind of snare. Like, I would take maybe a sample or my original sound, make my own sample, drive it through this, and either use it as a complete sample replacement if I was going for a wild snare sound, or use it to augment or support my main snare sound. And now you're getting to these like iconic, memorable types of snares that you'll actually find on your favorite records, where they are doing weird stuff to the snare that maybe you're not doing.
Yeah, when I heard that, I was thinking like JJP 90s, almost like Heavier Things, John Mayer, ringy snare, you know?
Totally.
Like, it immediately made me think that.
Yep. And then I did a little bit more, and this is to play around just with the idea of, I really liked this. So I did two things here. One, I tried taking this in a darker direction with this reverb, and the reverb is darkening up the sound overall. But I said, what would it sound like if we went for a bright snare tone? And I literally turned your Electrodyne EQ up to as far as it would go, plus 12 dB, and it just sounds cool. So here is our before this EQ being added, and then we'll show the after. And this would be such a great learning tool, I think, for people who learn frequency ranges. I'll take you to 10K, 5K, and 3K, and they all sound great at plus 12 dB in their own unique ways. So here's our before. Here's our after. That's our 10K boost. I'm going to do it without reverb. Here's our before. 10K boost. And then 5K boost. Totally different tone. There's just 3. And layering that on top of reverb.
It almost sounds electronic at this point.
Exactly. And I have completely reimagined this. It almost bears no resemblance to this original snare sound. But to me, that is a potentially usable sound. Maybe the reverb's a little bit long and I want to bring down the reverb a touch now that I've done this brightening. I don't think I love the sound of the reverb anymore because of how much I'm brightening. But without this brightening, I like the reverb. And then with this brightening, now I want to darken the reverb further because the reverb should be much darker than the snare. But these are sounds that I would use to layer with other stuff, literally from just like taking a plugin, turning up the EQ as far as it'll go, putting on some pedals that were never designed for snare. And I think they're fun sounds. Now, is this the kind of sound that you're always going to use as like your main snare sound on a record? Not necessarily. But if you listen to some of your favorite snare sounds on your favorite records, you will come to realize how demented some of them sound. And sometimes the answer is just going crazy like this, or going crazy like this with something and folding that in underneath. And it can be a unique, fun, and inspiring way to work, especially in parallel where it's safe, or as you gain some confidence, even not in parallel. All right, we've done extreme, Taylor. I want to give the people one more thing before I see if they have any questions. And that one more thing is going to be subtle. So we're going back to the mix. Now that we've done some demented stuff, I want to hear each of these on a general mix. This is a mix that your team sent over, and I'm first going to bring up, here it is, the latest one, the Hazel Rig VNE. And I'll give you my tasting notes in a minute. Again, be on good headphones or good monitors to really hear these differences. But this is a compressor. But what I really hear here is the very subtle change in the frequency response and the saturation profile from this device. I hear that even more than the compression. And let me know what you hear. And then after that, I'll give you my tasting notes. Enter it into the chat. Here we go. So what do you guys hear happening there? I'll tell you what's really coming across to me is there's this additional bloom in like the subs. There's something happening in the lows where I feel like it's getting shaped a little bit more towards the subs and a little bit less towards the upper bass. And there's just a little bit of this kind of additional kind of fullness happening down there. And it just sounds subtly more finished. So here's our before again. Do you hear how the bottom end becomes like a little bit more supple? We're pretty well level matched here. The place where I feel a lift is just in the sub region, but not in a way that's making it muddy and boomy, in a way that feels very controlled and is like just adding to the pulse that's already there. Do you feel some of those things, Taylor?
Yeah, it's almost like mastering or something. Like it's like it just sounds more finished. It's very fast. It's very hi-fi, very clear, very charming. And it's just kind of like riding those peaks, but like you're not feeling it like change the source material. It's just kind of like a different presentation of it, right?
Totally. And I feel like the same kind of thing happens when I run it through this guy, which is your Coil Audio CA70S. But this one, instead of tilting it towards the subs, seems to tilt it a little bit more towards the low and center mids for me. But a similar kind of idea. Here's the before. So this one feels, again, it's fairly level matched. I feel like where it's bringing things up ever so subtly are in the exact areas where it's just adding this a little bit of push for me in the lower mids and maybe center mids, but again, without it making it muddy or boxy, because it's doing it in a kind of non-linear way, if that makes sense. One more time, here's our before. And it's just doing this thing where I don't think we've really increased the peak level, but because we're adding some saturation to it, we've increased the RMS slightly. So it feels a little bit louder at the same peak level, and it just has a little bit more pulse and a little bit more density, if that makes sense. Sweet. Next one that you had here was your Pultec. Now, your Pultec is different than other Pultecs, and although it looks like every other Pultec I've seen, if I look very closely, I can see one or two differences that are different than most Pultecs out there. Can you, first of all, if you can catch in the chat, what's different about this Pultec? Look at the numbers very closely and tell me if you see anything, and type into the chat if you can beat Taylor to it. And now, Taylor, what is different about this Pultec? Why did you make a Pultec when there's so many Pultecs out there? This is the first device I see here, which like, we already have this. Why'd you make it?
So this is based off of the one. So there are a few vintage versions of this. Like CLA uses those on his mix bus, but it's based off of the mastering version, which you can see the low end frequency. It's not 60, it's 70, and then it has some of the high shelves on it. So the unit actually is a little bit different than like the EQP1A that everybody has modeled. And then ours also can toggle between tube and solid state. But I will say, in our beta team, people prefer this so much to the regular Pultecs that they've asked us to add in the old frequencies. So I think we're going to do an update and make it so you can do the old stuff or the EQP1A stuff with it as well.
Sure. All right. Here is our before, and then we'll do an after. And if I need to, I'll tweak the output to level match it because we are doing actually a little bit of boosting here as well as attenuation. Here's our before. Let me, sometimes when I turn these plugins for the first time since opening them, it sometimes does a little soft coming out of bypass.
Are you running it in solid state right now?
Oh yeah, I think I switched this from tube to solid state.
That's so that's right. Going to be the cleaner. Yep.
Yes. So, real quick, Taylor and I did a test where we were trying to see if I could tell the difference between the solid state and the tube because it was fairly subtle on this device because the Pultecs are subtle. So, Taylor, did I do okay at guessing between the solid state and the tube?
Yeah, you got 9 out of 10.
Right. So I could tell the difference, but I have to admit it's fairly subtle. I think we're going to hear a little bit more softening of the transients, particularly in the lows and some of those big hits. Here is it again in tube mode. Out of bypass first. Now, to make this more fair, I'm going to turn down the output by about a dB, and let's hear that. Cool. And I wanted to play around with this kind of idea a little bit more as well. So I did a little bit of this with the VLC. Right now I have the EQ out. I just want to hear the tone of this. And to be honest, this VLC from Hazel Rig, also a Farron style tube device, sounds different than the VNE. I've pushed this one harder. I pushed the gain way up to 10, so I'm backing the output down. And then I want to see about taking things in a darker direction. So I'd have a little bit of a high cut and a little bit of a low boost. So we'll play that next when I hit the EQ in option here. Oh man, my master is down by 4 dB. I'm realizing now that I've been playing all these audio examples quieter than I intended to. Darn, darn, darn. I don't know how or when that happened, but this came down a little bit. All right, so here is, so apologies if you felt these audio examples are too quiet. They're about to come up. So here is the Hazel Rig before. So that's the classic, like, clean tube sound that I'm used to out of stuff like Farron and Hazel Rig, where I feel like things are getting a little glossier, like we emphasize almost like the bottom and top without it feeling scooped, if that makes sense. And then on top of that, I wanted to try what would it be like if we took this in a tapier direction to kind of roll off a little bit of top. So here's that. So to me, that's just adding a little bit of weight without being muddy. We can also do it in a different direction. I wanted to play around again with this Electrodyne and just try brightening it a little bit and see what this would do. This is a really significant boost for a mastering context. But even with a boost of around 4 dB in the 10K area, I think it sounds good. Here's our before. So that's the opposite direction. We're going for this more glossy pop thing. And honestly, stacking them together where I first do this kind of fattening and darkening with the Hazel rig, and then adding a little bit of 10K brightness back in to just give it a little bit of a peak around there is a kind of fun sound. So here's our before. I love that what that's doing to the drums. Now, in a mastering context, this is reshaping the mix too much. And but I kind of love what is happening to the drums where they get fattened and thickened, and then some of this brightness is put back in. So let's hear that one more time. In a mastering context, I feel like I'm taking away from the vocal too much by making the drum sound so much cooler, but the drums do sound so much cooler, and it is adding something to the pulse of the track. So
you want to hear a really weird quirk?
Please.
Go back to the Hazel rig and put it in instrument mode and listen to what that does to the nature of the sound.
All right. Now we're driving it like way harder. It cannot handle it. It's cracking up, and it almost feels like it's cracking up differently on left and right.
I figured out on some sources I like the way instrument mode sounds, it makes no sense because in the real world you would never be able to do that. Right. Like it's meant to plug a guitar in. So it's like, I think it's just running at a different impedance or something. But like, I love that you can do that. It's breaking rules and it's a completely different sound.
Yeah, totally. Making mistakes easier for more awesomeness and fun.
Yeah.
All right, sweet. Now, just because we got to hear some of these a little bit quieter than I meant to play them, I just want to play that snare example one more time for people now that I have the level juiced up. But here was the before and after on this really simple one. It's just so cool how that's adding some dimensionality and character without being over the top. And then if you do want over the top, it is my little... wild, completely transformed. And I think we had a pretty good sense in the vocal, but again, since I had these audio examples a little quieter than I wanted in the beginning, in case anyone complains, I'll give one more quick shot to our VNE.
Head underwater. Head underwater.
And without it?
Head underwater. Holding my breath at the bottom. Now I'm caught in the slaughter.
But the really fun thing for me on this one was this 1981, where as soon as I add this in,
Head underwater, holding my breath at the bottom. Now I'm caught in the slaughter. Got myself in an endless fight.
beautiful. Fun stuff. And one more going back to this retro. This again sounds like a retro, but it's doing things that a retro can't do. I shouldn't say a retro, a stay level, because retro is a new brand. Originally, they were stay level by who made the stay level originally? I'm trying to remember. Gates. Gate stay level, yeah. So it does things that a gate stay level can't do. So here's our before again. Beautiful. I'm having a lot of fun with these, man. I got to say, I've been impressed by these. You guys have been around now making plugins, I feel like for 4 years, and you've made about 30 plugins. So that's something like 8 plugins a year. You've just had a new release today of this Hazel V&E. It is temporarily, for a very limited time, if you're catching this when it comes out, is on sale for 33% off. So $100 instead of $150. A lot of fun stuff in here. Are there any other favorite standouts that we didn't get to look at today?
I mean, I use them all. Like, if maybe we do one where you plug your guitar in and we start getting into that stuff. That some of the amp stuff is pretty crazy. And yeah, we have drum stuff. I could announce on here that we have the Sleep Token drum library coming out on the 10th. So look out for that.
Nice. And also, another thing that you emulated that I'm excited about is this Ashdown bass rig. This is one of these companies that I don't feel like has been modeled as much as other like super famous classics. But the Ashdown has, I remember when they were first becoming popular and I was playing in bands back then, being like, wow, these are just like the fattest, coolest sounding amplifiers around. And I don't know, they just have a totally different tone than Ampeg or Fender or whoever else. I would describe them as being like the inverse of Gallion Kruger, where stuff like that is kind of like lean and tight and clean sounding. Like the Ashdowns are just like fat and thick, and they're like low mid forward without being muddy. And I think that's a kind of theme that's in a lot of your stuff. It adds kind of like mids and fullness without making things muddy and indistinct. And that's what
color and musicality. Another thing that you have pulled up, you see that pop top boost? So that is a pedal in real life that you can put any op amp in and use that as a gain boost. So we modeled a bunch of different op amps in that.
Oh, sweet.
Like vintage ones, all kinds of weird stuff. That sounds really good on mastering.
Oh, I definitely have to try that application, because I was just thinking that would be fun for a guitarist to learn about the sound of different op amps using pedals. But I didn't even think about that idea of hearing how they would affect things in the mastering.
Think like API op amps. It's like those ones, the API format.
Sweet. Beautiful. All right, dude. Well, it's been too good to have you on. I'm super stoked. I really just discovered your brand fairly recently, and I'm so excited you could come on the channel. I've been impressed by this stuff. Every model that I've tried sounds interesting, unique, and good. And I've got to say, you're filling in cracks that have been left by other brands. I look at the plugin collection, the only thing that I saw was like, oh yeah, a whole bunch of people have done this as a Pultec. But your Pultec is different than everybody else's Pultec. Even now that more people are trying to emulate the stay level kind of thing, again, it does things that other stay levels can't. And it also emulates an original stay level extremely precisely, as well as making it more flexible and more usable in more different places. And I've just had so much fun playing around with all of these pedals on things like vocals and drums, and people should do more of that. So check these guys out over at MixWave.com. Big thanks to Taylor for hooking me up with these plugins, letting me try them out, coming on the channel, being supporters of the channel. Show them some love and help them keep making cool, fun boutique plugins by checking out some of their stuff over at MixWave.com. Taylor, any parting words for the people?
No, I mean, I feel the same way as you. I'm excited for people to get musical and creative and mix in a flow state, mix off of intuition. Don't go down rabbit holes where you're getting all analytical. I mean, you can, like I do that. I shoot out op amps, I shoot out cables, I shoot out all these weird things, but like I'm not mixing when I do that. When I'm mixing, I want to be musical and I want to be creative and just go off of feeling. So I think just echoing what you said before, even talking about the Michael Brower thing, like that's kind of the whole ethos of our company is like, just trying unorthodox, unconventional things and being able to get things that are cooler that you wouldn't be able to achieve if you had a bunch of precise instruments.
Yeah, sweet. And just to read through a couple of chats from the audience that have been coming in, Dave Dunshire says, yes, I can really hear the charming element on the Hazel rig. This morning I woke up dead says that pulse with modulation is very linear. District Sound Lab says the 1981 sounds so sick on almost anything. There's legit a setting that works on any source. Yeah, I gotta say the 1981 is one of the coolest looking and coolest sounding pedals that I have tried recently. So I'm not surprised that both you and District Sound Labs are big fans of it. District Sound Lab also says that CA70S is one of my favorite plugins of all time. All right, so we have someone on here on the stream who has tried more than one MixWave plugin. That's awesome. Music Mania says, I have this plugin. It sounds really great. No cap, just marvelous. And Dave Dunsire says that this crushes on bass too. District Sound Lab wanted to talk a little bit more about the coil, and he says that the genius is a coil added the NF knob to the front of the box. Having a plugin of it with wet dry is so clutch. Can you tell us what the NF knob on the coil does? That's something we didn't cover in much detail.
Yeah, it's a negative feedback system, and it sends the same signal and bends the phase, which creates different cancellations. It's, I guess to make it easy, it's like a darkening tool. So running it all the way to the left is wide open, and then as you push it to the right, it kind of darkens things.
I got to play with that just a tiny bit on, I think it's here, take it out of bypass. Oh, if I could mix.
Love you like I used to. Think of you in every single thing I do. From California all the way to Timbuktu. I still love you like I used to. Love you like I used to. I still love you like I used to.
You can take it that far. That's amazing.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Last couple comments I'm going to get through here real quick. Oh, I thought I was sharing my screen there, but I wasn't. Dave Dunsire says, I have this pedal and it's one of my favorites. I think he's talking about the 1981 there. District Sound Lab says the Morning Glory has been his favorite drive pedal for 10 or more years. Alec Barbie says, Callan, your soft synth saver preset on the CA70 is money. Do you know what he's referring to there?
Yeah, he's just talking about one of the user presets. So he's talking about the soft synth saver. So that's probably just a stock preset that you can open and click.
Sweet. Alex seems to be really excited about having 70 hertz on a Pultec, and just a whole bunch of people here in the chats all talking about their favorite pedals that you have emulated and their favorite plugins from you guys. So I'll let you guys go through more of this on your own. Thank you guys so much for joining us here. It's been a pleasure to have Taylor on the channel. Again, check him out at mixwave.com. Support your local little plugin developer who's making cool and awesome things that other people aren't making. So Taylor, again, thanks for being here. Thanks for being supporters of the SonicScoop channel. And I'm, from now on till death, a supporter of MixWave because I've had so much fun trying these things out.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you guys. See you next time.